Today is February the 23rd, 2016. My name is Tanya Finchum, and along with me is Dr. Charles Abramson. I'm with the OSU Library, and Charles is with the Department of Psychology. And today we are in Stillwater on campus to speak with Dr. Bruce Crauder, who is the Associate Dean for Arts and Sciences as well as Professor of Mathematics. So thank you for letting us visit with you today.
Thank you.
Let's begin with having you tell us when and where you were born.
I was born July 20th, 1954 in Beirut, Lebanon.
And is there a story there?
Well, first, the main reason I was born there was because my mother was there at the time. That was the main consideration. But no, my dad worked for the UN, and so till I was about 4 or 5, we were in the Middle East, and they were in Beirut for most of that time.
And then when you came back, where did you grow up, basically?
Well, I don't know about the growing up part, but I spent till 5th grade near Westchester, Pennsylvania. That's just west of Philadelphia, and then from 5th grade through high school in Yellow Springs, Ohio, which is just a small college town.
And what was your father doing there?
My father was working at Wilberforce University, which is the oldest historically black school in the United States. So.
And what did he teach, or did he teach?
He was doing business management. He was sort of the Joe Weaver of a very small school.
So some math. Maybe where you got your math?
No idea. No idea.
So in high school, did you have a favorite subject?
There was math and science, mostly physics.
And what year would you have graduated from high school?
1972.
And was it Yellow Springs High School, or called
Yellow
something?
Springs High School. Maybe it was called Yellow Springs Public High School, I'm not sure.
Okay.
It was the only one in Yellow Springs, though.
Did you have brothers and sisters?
I have a sister, a younger sister, 2 years younger.
Okay. And once you finished high school, what did you do?
I finished high school, I went to college. I went to Haverford College, which is a small liberal arts school in the Philadelphia main line.
And how did you choose there?
I was looking for small schools. Actually, I was looking for a number of possible schools, but and I was looking at the stronger Quaker schools, which are Swarthmore and Haverford. And since I'm Quaker, and Haverford just hit the right note with me.
And having been in Pennsylvania, it was a natural fit instead of somewhere in Ohio?
I'm sorry.
It was a natural fit. You had spent some time in Pennsylvania prior to Ohio.
I would have gone somewhere else too, but it was, it's a nice little school. At the time, I remember the faculty talking about how impersonal it had become since it had gone from 600 students to 800 students. So
Pretty small.
It was small, all-men's college, and it became co-ed in the years since.
Did you have scholarships, or did you have to work your way through?
I had a scholarship that was given to me in my hometown, but my parents had saved, and so I was very lucky.
Well, during high school, did you work part-time?
Let's see, I was a lifeguard, and I also worked in, there's the Fells Memorial Laboratory, and let's see, I did a couple projects there, but I was mostly working, they had a really interesting project where they were doing longitudinal studies, but unfortunately they had taken x-rays, so they were looking at physical growth in families, and they had taken x-rays of folks of each of their bones, and so we classified the bones, and we'd on the film, and we'd write on the film. I have very poor handwriting, so that was actually rather painful, but it was very difficult because they had taken the x-ray doses had been large enough that in fact there was a lot of genetic mutation and damage in subsequent generations. So it was an example of of perhaps less than careful science, or perhaps unintended consequences. But it was, so you got to see sort of the inside of science with human beings.
Learned a little bit more than you expected.
I did. I also learned that if your handwriting is bad enough and your job is to have good handwriting, it's not a good fit and you get in trouble in the job. And that happened.
Well, besides school and work, what did you do for fun back in those days?
I spent most of my time out in the woods. There was a wonderful nature preserve, and I used to take long walks in the woods, or just spend a lot of time observing pond life and just sitting quietly in the woods.
Pondering
things. Yeah, just being out in the woods.
Okay, so while you were at Haverford, did I say that correctly?
Yes.
Were you aware of Phi Beta Kappa?
Vaguely.
Did they have a
They
chapter?
did. Oh yeah, they have an old chapter. And so there's an odd story with this, and this is at least my understanding of the story, which is that my good friend Bill Guda, in the who was inducted into Phi Beta Kappa, the beginning of his junior year, I think, approached me about being a member of Phi Beta Kappa, and I wanted nothing to do with some sort of elitist Greek type organization. And I said, I don't think so. Many years later, when I was here, I contacted Haverford to say, by the way, I made a really juvenile mistake, and I'm thinking better of this, and was just wondering if you had any records that would back this up. And they had none. They said, you've done fine work at Haverford, but we don't base things just based on grades and courses taken, but also on interviews and so on. And there was no official records of my having been nominated or anything. So I had a nice little letter from them, but that was so that was my exposure to Phi Beta Kappa at the time, which was that I thought it was some sort of elitist thing that one wouldn't want to be part of. But you have to remember also, this was the early 70s, and I'd purposely gone to a school that did not have fraternities, or it certainly didn't have sororities since it was a men's school, but it was, it had no fraternities, and it thought fraternities would be a very bad thing, because they separate out people and they create a different culture. And that was just a different time, and also I was young and immature.
Well, while you were there, were you involved with any activities outside of the classroom?
Oh, sure, yeah. I did theater work, doing a lot of set building and set designing, and I did a lot of folk dancing. I did an awful lot of that, probably 5 nights a week. And what other things did I do? Yeah, I was a busy kid. I was thrilled to be at a place where I could do all sorts of things. I read all of Hawthorne and all of Poe my first year because I was so happy to be at a place. It had a library that had all these books. I was going to work my way through. I remember being very excited on the Poe books because for some of them I could, which were from, some of these were not first editions but close to it, and they had the wonderful leather bindings and so on, but on some of them I had to cut the pages because no one had actually ever read this particular one before. So I was thrilled to be able to have that, and also because I could stay up at night and read as late as I wanted, which was something I'd always had to hide with a flashlight under the covers. High school, because for some reason my parents thought I should get more sleep. So I was so happy to be in college. I could stay up as late as I wanted, read as much as I wanted, and so I read the things I wanted to read. That was great.
And what was your major there?
Mathematics.
Mathematics. And you graduated from there in?
In 76.
76. And then what did you do?
Then I went to Columbia University.
Okay.
And
For a master's and?
Well, you sort of get a master's on the way there. They don't, if you're applying for a master's, they won't accept you. You apply for a PhD and get a master's.
From a small school to a rather large one.
Rather large school. I remember that the classes were, of course, larger than my classes as an undergraduate, my graduate classes. And also, I noticed quickly that I was not the smartest person in the room, which I mean, previously, obviously, faculty accepted, but, and I wasn't necessarily the smartest person at Haverford, but I sort of felt I might be. But I knew that not to be true when I got to Columbia. And that was a really important thing to realize, that there were people who were amazingly bright.
They better on tests than you?
Oh, no, just plain smarter. Their brains just worked just that much better. They had wonderful backgrounds. They and often, annoyingly, they were actually really nice people too. So you couldn't go and say, well, you know, yeah, they're really bright, but there was often no but. So that was an important thing to learn.
Well, did you spend much time in the library there?
No, well, there was a separate math library in the math building, and I spent time there, but at that point in graduate school, that was the first time I really had to study. And also, there were many topics that didn't just have some nice modern textbook in it, that you had to plow through lots of things in order to find the information you needed. And so I spent a lot of time that was a separate math library. It was a wonderful library. But of course, the Columbia, the library, I'm pretty sure it had closed stacks then, so it was not so interesting, because I just love browsing in general, browsing in libraries, bookstores, and so on. But the separate math library was wonderful.
You didn't have as much leisure time there either, it sounds like.
I found leisure time, but it wasn't as much. Yeah.
When you graduated from there and with your PhD, when?
That would be in 81. Yeah, 1981.
And then what did you do?
I had a postdoc position at the Institute for Advanced Study in Princeton, and Advanced Studies in Princeton, and that was a wonderful year, because it was a year for people in my field, which was algebraic geometry, and sort of anyone who was everyone. I mean, all these people were there who were really quite amazing. And there was a group of us, young folks, who we got to know each other. We wrote a book together, and well, it's really a collection of articles with a lot of, this person's working with this. We had a lot of collaborations. And in math, since most articles are written by only one person, these sort of collaborations are just something really quite special.
Then from there?
Then from there, I went to the University of Utah I had a 4-year postdoc, and I interrupted that in the middle with a year at the University of Pennsylvania because it was just a nice opportunity.
I should back up. Along the way, did you get married at some point?
I did get married in 1982.
So after you finished your PhD?
Yeah. I think my mom had made it very clear that you should not marry until you finished your education.
And you always listened to Mom?
Well, I did then.
Even under the covers. Well, then, take us how you came to be here at OSU.
Well, when I was leaving Utah, I was looking for jobs. I was looking for tenure track jobs, and I was looking for. Excuse me, it's not emotion; it's allergies. So I was looking for jobs. I was looking for places in smaller towns. I'd lived in New York. I'd sort of done New York City. Salt Lake is a small city, but I was looking for places in universities in smaller places. I was looking for really good math departments, and OSU has a really quite outstanding math department, and the way that they approached hiring. And I mean, frankly, Bus Jaco, who's now the department head, was then the department head. There was a time in between when he wasn't, but he was. He just had a way of approaching hiring and the role of faculty that was really quite intriguing. I was looking for places where they would have. So, for example, at Columbia, there were seminars, maybe 4 or 5 seminars a week, and the seminars were for, these weren't credit things, these were for graduate students and faculty to go, and they'd invite speakers in, or someone would talk about their own research. And this is what I was used to. At Utah they had that, at Penn they had that, but I noticed some other schools that I applied to would have a weekly seminar and that's it, and just have one invited speaker, and instead of having many. And so here we had, there were 4 or 5 seminars, and so it had the feel of the same type of schools that I was used to, which were very research intensive, and where you didn't stop learning just because you were now off doing your own research. You stopped learning. You were still learning sort of in community.
And that was in 1980.
86 I came here.
So 30 years.
30 years, that's right.
Was there other competition at the time, or did you, was this?
There were some other schools.
And OSU won out for that particular reason?
Actually, yeah, I was really pleased that I had a choice, not because I was thinking of going to someplace else, but because it made it easier to say, I'm here. I've made that, I've chosen this among other choices. So
Campus was pretty nice at that point, or different?
Didn't really notice the campus, didn't really care about the campus. I cared about the type of university because I wanted a university where I could make a difference. And some of the other schools were a little more elite, and I really just, I felt like anyone could do those jobs, and I didn't need to do that. And I liked the fact that, I live about a mile from the math department, and I could go in and work anytime. It was, so in other words, it was easy to do research, and it was a great group of people, and it was to my mind, a very nice teaching environment.
Where was your first office?
First office was on the fourth floor of Math Sciences, but I don't remember the number. I don't remember numbers very well. That may seem funny. I can tell you exactly how to get to the office, but I'm a geometer, so you remember that. And like, what's my office number? I don't know. How would I know that? But I know how to get there.
Well, that building is still standing too, so.
It is, yeah.
Well, then take us through your career here at OSU, or your 30 years, just hitting the highlights.
Well, let's see. I had I left for a half year to go to UNC Chapel Hill, because basically I was invited to go. It was just a nice opportunity, and that was nice. I think my kids were really small then, and it's a good school, good environment, and I had good colleagues, particularly at Duke, just right around the corner. So that was good. And then, let's see, I went off to, I took a sabbatical for a year at Colorado State University to work with a really great colleague there, who's actually now the provost at Colorado State. And it's just one of the smartest people I know, both smartest and wisest, which is, I suspect, why he's provost there. But he's just, he has these incredible both people skills and just a really bright mathematician. Remember I talked about people who are brighter than you are? Yeah. And then after I came back, I guess the position of Associate Dean was open. I think Rick Roars had been in this position and no longer was sick of it. I suspect you'd have to ask him, but so that was 1996, 2007 that I started here as Associate Dean.
Okay.
And I've sort of been in that position or interim dean since.
Any highlights? I mean,
Oh,
any major books or
there are many. Let's see.
solutions to problems that no one else had solved?
Oh, I don't think the solutions to problems are ones that are easy to describe, or that. But there's some nice textbooks that came out as we thought about different ways to engage students, because the favorite thing was to avoid to say, you students, you can't use calculators. And then some of us sort of turned this around and said, what if you said, actually, you have to use calculators? How would you change what you're teaching, or what you are testing, or how you are testing? And so when we thought about that for a long time, we realized that we could put students, we could put students in a position where they could learn, they could quickly learn some really nice things that would previously have been inaccessible, because they'd have to have. So basically, we were able to skip basically a year of college algebra, and allow them to replace that with use of a calculator to get to some really nice questions about rates of change, and basically do calculus type problems that were way more interesting, and that were actually real problems instead of the sort of artificial problems that are often presented in college algebra textbooks. So that was a really fun project, and it kind of got a group of us. I like working with other people, and so there were 3 of us who worked together, and we're still working on, I forget if it's the 5th or the 6th edition of that textbook. And then we started writing other textbooks, and that's been a source of a lot of joy, because you're able to do. There's no point in writing a textbook for the same thing just done by you instead of somebody else, but doing something that's really different, that embodies the way I like to teach, and really allows students to engage better with their mathematics, particularly those students, the liberal arts students, who may be really good in other areas, but think they're very bad in math. And so that's a wonderful population. Bright view. I like to think of one course that we developed, which I like to think of it as like math for good poets, because you want people who can think, and they believe that they're poor, not good in mathematics. But if you tease them with certain types of questions and certain types of problems, they're willing to put far more effort in. And if you can have them just ignore all those terrible things that happened in 4th grade and when they were learning fractions and so on, and have them focus on, okay, forget all that, now let's talk about this now, they're able to realize that they can say things and they can be successful in mathematics. So.
Well, if you had to choose between administration and classroom, which would you choose?
Well, the classroom. But that's misleading, because I'm here in this office. So.
Do you teach today?
I do.
You do?
Not today, but I usually teach one class each semester. Just recently I started not teaching in the spring because the tenure and promotion and all these things were, basically I was not doing anything well. When you have too many things going on at once, that can happen. But that was very difficult. Last spring was the first semester that I had not taught since I was going to say I was on sabbatical, but actually I taught there. So I was gone for the year, and I had a reduced teaching at Colorado State. So that's the first time I'd not taught since 1982. So it was actually not pleasant to not teach, and Now I'm appreciating what you can do in terms of other things that I need to do, and some of it's writing and mathematics, and some of it's getting the job done administratively. But there's a cost, and you know, I do love being in the classroom and like teaching. So
Okay, we need to get to the topic of the day.
this is a lot of background.
Well, we'll begin into Phi Beta Kappa. How did you get involved with this endeavor?
Okay, the Phi Beta Kappa endeavor, I got into it originally administratively because, of course, arts and sciences is the place that captures the vast majority of the liberal arts disciplines. And we were going to be applying, and I forget what year this was. And Perry Gethler had been applying for many years. That is, had been leading the application process for OSU, and I think he wanted help on. I think this was about 3 cycles before we actually got it. And there was a question of generating data. There was a tremendously painful set of data that were wanted for the application itself. List all buildings on campus. List when they were built, out of what materials, and when they were last renovated. I know what they were looking for. They wanted to know if your school consisted of 4 double-wide trailers. But it's sort of painful because then I went to the buildings people and said, could I get a list of buildings on campus? And there are about 1,000 buildings, some of which are, this is all property owned by OSU. And of course there's a cow barn, there's all sorts of things that I thought, well, actually those really aren't the point. But there was going through a lot of data and finding financial data, and I was pretty good at knowing who might be able to help find information. And so Perry was leading this, but I was getting data, is the way I remembered this. And then that continued, and I was sort of more and more involved with trying to find the right information. And I guess I insinuated myself into the process. That's the way I sort of view it. Because at some point I was like, okay, we need a cover for this thing, we need this, who's going to do this, how are we going to find? And so I just thought of myself as a facilitator of the process.
And each time in the previous cycles when it didn't work, how did you react or respond to that?
Well, I think we were kind of used to that. It was disappointing, and as we realized that 11 of the schools in the Big 12, at that time the Big 12 had 12 schools, as it ought to have, instead of, I think it has 10 now. I don't really know these things, but it seemed absurd that we would be, I mean, it was one thing when at one time Phi Beta Kappa was basically the sort of the elite schools, the small liberal arts schools, but once they opened themselves up to the larger public universities, it seemed that we certainly had a place. And there were really good advocates such as Burns. Burns Hargis was a big advocate, was very helpful and then we had at least one provost who was very helpful, maybe 2. And we eventually, I think our application process became more and more refined. And I think we learned some things from the Phi Beta Kappa people were very encouraging. I didn't get the sense that they wanted us to apply repeatedly and never get it. They were, it was tricky because there was the professional staff of Phi Beta Kappa, but those aren't the people who actually make the decisions, because they are the staff and not the deciders. And so we would really make the case to the staff, and There were lots of really lovely things where, for example, the application was delivered in person by Burns at least one time of this, so maybe two times, maybe for 2 cycles, I'm not sure. But we were convinced that we were getting closer and closer, although it's unclear. I mean, when you don't get something, you do get it or you don't get it, so it's not so clear what close means. And you could apply, I guess it's once every 4 years. And because it just has a 4 years or 3 years, I'm sorry, I can't recall that exactly. And so we would just, we'd start again and try to see what possible deficiencies, if any, we could find. I don't think we got a lot of feedback. We got some informal feedback from the staff. I seem to recall that.
Do you recall a major deficiency, a primary one?
I think there were the concerns at one time. Arts and sciences was viewed as sort of a very much a less than part of the campus. That we were to provide the gen ed for the gen ed classes for the that we were basically a service college for the other parts. That changed dramatically under Dean Smith Holt when he started in the early 80s. But I think there was a reservoir of ill feeling about well, compared to other schools, the diminished role of particularly the humanities. And so there were certain faculty members, excuse me, there were, I think, some faculty members who were members of Phi Beta Kappa who were unhappy with OSU and who thought that we really didn't deserve a chapter. People are welcome to their own feelings, but that sort of thing doesn't help in an application process. And then I think over time, things change. Things change very positively in terms of support for humanities and the arts, social sciences. They're basically the disciplines that are so strongly represented in Phi Beta Kappa. So I think there was just a few that faculty were better treated than they were at one time. And then there were things like the strength of the library, really basic things. And I think the library is, for example, much stronger than it once was. These basic questions of support, what kind of institution are you, and whether the institution would value membership in Phi Beta Kappa. And that required a clear demonstration at the top. And then we had really some wonderful people who were sort of cheerleaders on the side. You've already interviewed some of them, I think. So.
Well, if you hadn't got it the last time, do you think you'd have tried again? That would have been really painful. Yeah, because I think we were, but it would have, I guess, depend on where in the process we would have been turned down. But I remember we were getting very close, and there were a small number of schools. It was something like 5 or 6 maybe, and then all you were hoping for was that we didn't have some sort of scandal on campus. At least one of the schools had an on-campus scandal, something that would make the Chronicle of Higher Education and would clearly tilt things the wrong way in the eyes of the Phi Beta Kappa sort of General Assembly. I use that term, but I think that's not the proper term. You just hope that everything would just go just so. And I remember having to answer at the last minute a tremendous number of questions that would, well, what if they asked this? What if they asked this? How would we respond to this? And sort of working through that. But I also remember sort of late in that process being asked, well, what do you think our odds are? And I thought, I don't know. But I tend to be not,
when there are processes that are out of my control, I tend to be very cautious about suggesting that it will turn out positively. So that's just my nature there.
Were you involved with site visits?
Oh, yes. Yes, and we talked through what the schedule was, and then Gary Clark was extremely helpful in the president's office. Just in at some point when we realized, oh, actually we haven't really done the groundwork that we need to for the site visit. Let's get that in gear. Let's arrange a really good schedule. And then the president's office has some amazing people who are really good at making things happen on campus. So if you really need something like, how do we do this? Yeah, it's done. And so that was very helpful.
Well, did you travel to Florida for the time when they got to vote?
I did. We stayed in a really fancy hotel because that's where the meeting was. And we kind of just waited in the sun. I mean, there was a wonderful reception where I saw I had a sort of a personal connection with, I guess, then Vice President of Phi Beta Kappa, whose father had been on the faculty here in Religious Studies. So I had worked closely with him. And just a wonderful person, but there we were, and you just hoped it'll all work. So there was the little plane, and you know it's apparently very exciting and exotic to fly in these little personal planes for a short time. But flying from here to Florida in one of those, yeah, I thought this is actually not that great, but it was very effective in getting us there. In short order. So it was exciting. We flew down, and we were, I think, I vaguely remember us sitting around, there was some sort of cafeteria, some sort of little restaurant, and waiting, and there, we had an advocate who was I think he was the provost at the University of Tulsa, and who was a very, very nice guy and very helpful and pleasant, but he would ask, okay, what if they ask this? And there were tricky things because at some point they asked hard questions. They said, for example, your average salary for assistant professors, for female assistant professors, is less than for male assistant professors. Explain. And actually, it's an example of Simpson's paradox, which is this. It's a paradox that says you can, for example, in every department, female assistant professors could be paid more than male assistant professors, but overall, when you aggregate the data over all of arts and sciences, it can be the other way around. And people go, what? It's, well, actually, it depends on the average pay in the disciplines. So we had to kind of explain these sort of things.
Good to have a mathematician with you.
Well, I think
it's also common sense.
I was going to say you look at physics departments and computer science departments, and then you look at English departments and art departments, and what average salaries are, and so then it makes complete sense. But if you just cast it in the abstract, it's like, what? Which is, of course, why it's called a paradox. So.
And they asked these questions while you were there at the convention, or?
I think it was primarily our trying to be prepared for any question.
But they were verbalized questions. They weren't written ones that came back and forth.
No, actually, they were being sent to us by email, I think, if I recall. I just remember having to type a tremendous number of answers in my phone, and because I remember Burns being very impressed with my iPhone skills, which was really silly because lots of people are a lot faster than I am.
At the site visit, at least at our table, they asked the same questions about the salary difference.
Yeah.
And then we were able to answer it pretty easily. When you mentioned earlier you were gathering different types of data. Can you mention some of the people that helped you gather that?
Oh.
I know there was Xeroxing people, there's a whole range of support.
Oh, there were, oh dear, I'm trying to remember all the names, because I said thank you thing. Well, of course, every time someone gave me data, I'd thank them for the data. But all the institutional research people, so that whole office was great at providing, a number of names of faculty, of for example, the comparative salary data. And there were people like, I think, Brenna Dixon and folks who were, I'm throwing out names that I'm not sure which go with what, but there were all sorts of areas that I didn't know anything about, like, what is our plan for continued operation after in some sort of major emergency? I thought, what? But in fact, we have such things. Or do we have, what sort of backup systems do we have for data? So that would be something about how well prepared you are as an institution. I look at, for example, I think of when I was at Colorado soon, either before or after I was at Colorado State University, there was a flood, and it flooded the library. The question is what to do with all these wet books. And the answer was there's trucks someplace in Texas does freeze drying, very large scale freeze drying, and they freeze dried them all. And until all the moisture is sublimated away. So there were a question of certain plans, and also the questions changed from cycle to cycle. We'd have these 3-year cycles, and then they'd have slightly different questions. You go, oh, kill me now, because it just seemed very painful. But I don't know if you've seen the applications themselves, but they're pretty thick, and it's not data that you just, that's something we have certain institutional data that we're always preparing. And then there were others where apparently we're always preparing, I just didn't know that. And so I had to learn, yes, the percentage of people who get Pell Grants, which is an important indicator of, to my mind, your purpose as a school, because it means these are people who are below certain income levels. And so it says, okay, how elite you are in terms of socioeconomic status, or just economic status. And the fact that we have a fairly high percentage compared to some other schools, I thought was a source of pride. But I didn't realize, that number's out there in a certain report. But there are other ones that are not out there, and we had to go in and generate them. Or we had to generate the data. I had to say, okay, I had to find the person who generated that data. And I say, now, could you run the same thing, but restrict it only to the following majors? Because they wanted data for arts and sciences and not for the university as a whole, that sort of thing. And it wasn't just all of arts and sciences. There were pieces that were included and pieces that were. So, for example, biochemistry, which is an ag, is considered part of, it's a Phi Beta Kappa discipline. And so, because it is a liberal arts discipline. And there might be other ones. For example, communication sciences and disorders and arts and sciences is not. It's more of a pre-professional discipline. And so we had to shape, and we had to make some decisions on that to be consistent with Phi Beta Kappa expectations, albeit not necessarily written expectations. It was a long process.
Putting all the pieces together is like a puzzle, isn't it?
Yeah, and there was a committee that was the key, and it wasn't me just running off by myself doing things. There were pieces where I would gather that, but there were other ones, particularly when we do the ones that had real prose in them. But there were just really, there were many data that I have never worked with since, and don't see any reason why I would. But I think Phi Beta Kappa went by having I mean, they had a very general process, and part of it was, I think, are you able to actually complete this application? I think that was sort of their first bar.
Endurance.
Endurance, and are you, and then some of them really are. I think the one on the buildings was intended, really, it was to look at schools that are a little more fly-by-night and so on. And, you know, we're obviously a very solid university. We've been around a long time. We have more than adequate facilities. But they said, well, I mean, how would you define that? And so they're clever enough to actually put that out there. But it's like, when was Morrill Hall built, and when was it last renovated? Oh, turns out you can find out such things. There are people who know these things, but they're all over campus. So really, this was a whole, many people from all over campus, areas that I don't normally work with at all, were engaged with this. So in some sense, that was a very nice aspect, although it was stressful at the time.
A team effort.
Oh, very much so, very much so.
Do you remember where you were and how you reacted when you heard the news that it was a yes?
Well, of course, I was in Florida then, and they had the vote, and yeah, it was more relief than anything else. So there are various times in your life where you're sure that there's something very important that needs to happen, and the consequence of it not happening makes it seem as if it's impossible for it not to happen, and yet, you need to find out if it's going to happen or not.
Do you happen to remember who was the person that put the information together
Which information?
for the application? Because I remember all the committee members, we proofread it, we had different parts. But who was the person that, was there one person that put everything together? I don't remember that.
I think I assembled most of it as pieces, and then Lori out here in the front office, Lori Scanlon, did the making sure it was bound and that it would have the correct separators, and then we got a pretty cover with a really great picture of the library. I love the fact that the central building on campus here is not the administration building, but is the library. I thought that speaks to me. And so we had pictures, a really well done photograph of that printed on fancy paper, and then that needed to be incorporated in. And I think Lori set up all that and created those booklets. And then we used some sort of binding service that I'd never been to, but I discovered where it is. It's out way on the edge of campus. So, and she knew of such things, and so yeah, Lori's the one who put it together. I wish I had known to think of all the people who were involved, because somewhere I have in a file, which I think I may have now given, I think I gave all the files related to this to whoever's now keeping these things. But for each area I had who was my contact person, because in some sense I did nothing, but I asked things of other people, and then I put it together. And some of it was just interpreting, okay, what do we do, and why. Some things were for the whole university, some things just for the college, or some things were for the college, and other things were the college as defined. They were very careful to say, well, anyway, it was a quite rigorous application process.
Well, once you heard the news that was a yes, did you call anyone immediately? Who was the first person you told?
I
You don't
can't
remember?
remember. I think there was this group of us in Florida, and we were all just very happy, and lots of people. There was a reception then, I think, is that? And then there were lots of people who were congratulating us, and I just remember being really tired.
How does getting Phi Beta Kappa compare to your other achievements?
Phi Beta Kappa is a pretty awesome achievement. We had a wonderful ceremony for certain people who were considered sort of founding members, and so for me it was there was it was a sort of poignant thing because this was, remember I had rejected even the notion, and again this is just my memory of that, but now it's like, oh yeah, now I get to actually be a member of Phi Beta Kappa. This is kind of cool. So that was a very meaningful that celebration. It felt very good to be one of the sort of first people who was a member of the OSU Phi Beta Kappa chapter. I was very proud of that. And yeah, that was one of, I've had lots of high points in my life, but this is that was definitely one of them.
Hmm.
Yeah.
Have any of your students become members? Don't have to name names.
I usually teach. I usually teach introductory courses because the math department's thrilled to have me teach large introductory courses, particularly in something, for example, where I might have written the textbook, and so when other people teach it, they say, "Oh, it's so hard to teach." I go, "No, it's really easy to teach." And so I'm not really watching people go through that, but I have known some of our Phi Beta Kappa people, and been. I usually go to the induction, and I recognize people there. So yeah, and sometimes there are people I've just known through other things, but it's watching them through student government or this sort of thing. So. Very, very, yeah, we're really proud. I mean, one of the points of Phi Beta Kappa wasn't, it's, in some sense, it's, while it's an honorary thing, it's a good honor for the institution because it reflects that we do things in a certain way. It also, the key was, we kept saying, we have some really great students here who deserve to be recognized, and you, Phi Beta Kappa, should look forward to having such students counted as among your members, which is sort of the way we viewed this, that who is it for? It's for the students. And we have some great students here. We have many, many great students here, and we certainly have some who are worthy of Phi Beta Kappa membership. So it's a very pleasing thing to see that each spring we're able to inaugurate, to induct a small number of people in. I don't know if it's a small, medium-sized group of people who have been very carefully selected by the quite rigorous standards of Phi Beta Kappa.
Well, since you were successful with getting OSUs, have you been called upon by other institutions who are trying to get a chapter?
Oh no.
No.
Oh no.
No.
No. If someone were to ask me, I would give them. I would happily give them advice, but no, my role is very quiet, and I like to keep it that way. Just when I'm sort of nervous about all this being public.
But I think it would be fair to say that without Dr. Crauder's help over the years, this would never have happened. Because just gathering that data was very, very difficult to do.
Yeah, I don't know. Maybe I do know that I worked hard on it for certain intense periods of time when just trying to get how do we get the names of every athlete and what their scholarship money is and what their grade point is and so on. And can we get this, and are we allowed to release this? How can we do this? That sort of thing. It was just data that, and people would say, "What are you doing? Why are you doing?" And then it turns out that with, I think we could do this without naming names. Not that there were bad names or anything, but in the interest of student privacy. So the question is, what could we do? What could we present? And we could present what the major was and what the grade point average was. And I think they were just, Phi Beta Kappa looks upon having members at many, many institutions. And, academic higher education is an imperfect enterprise. And occasionally things happen in ways they shouldn't happen, and so the various membership committees are very careful to try to look at areas where they just are going to look with a jaundiced eye at certain types of data to make sure that we are staying true to the long-term mission of what it means to be an institution of higher education that truly values the liberal arts.
It was on your radar for a good part of your career here.
Oh, yes, but it was much, I mean, I can't remember when Harry Gessner first started, so that antedates me considerably.
Okay.
Yeah, he was the one who, I think he did the first application. It was in, somehow I think the late 70s, maybe 76.
Around in there, wasn't it?
Was
In
it?
there somewhere.
And then he continued with it sort of as a lonesome pursuit. And then, I mean, Dean Stringer was just critical. And I remember Marvin Keener talking with me about, well, Dean Stringer says, we need to do this. And I thought, I like Dean Stringer a lot. And I have tremendous respect for him. Funny first name, but that's because if he were a dean, he'd be Dean Stringer. But he's just very, very genial and very really smart, and the sort of student who you think, yeah, you would have been Phi Beta Kappa had you been here. And it's sometimes hard to get him to admit that he went to Harvard Law School, like I think every Supreme Court nominee in the last 20 years. So.
I think he's an honorary member, wasn't he? Made an honorary.
Yes, he was. He was with the same induction, with the little crowd as I was, and I was very proud to be with him because, you know, I've gotten to know him over the years. I think from when he was chairman of the Board of Regents, and I always thought of him as a wonderful supporter of, and you can see from various funds that he's endowed, where that is it's the library and arts and sciences that he's put his support into, and yeah, I've got tremendous respect for him.
Well, that late day in the fall of 2011 or 2012. It was 2011, wasn't it? When they finally said yes?
Oh, that's
I think.
Yeah,
When was the first
It
induction?
was 3 years ago.
okay. You'd know
Yeah,
better. That's
3 years ago.
I try to keep track of. I can usually know about yesterday, and by sometime in the evening I can figure out what might happen tomorrow.
Well, it was a very good day for OSU and a good day for you too.
Yes.
Do you have any other questions?
I'm sure I could spend another couple of hours, but...
No, it was a real honor for me to be part of this, and I got to work with some wonderful people. Very much, Charles was very much there, and the whole committee. I mean, particularly, I mean, there were the people who did the yeoman's labor of actually gathering names. For example, who are all the faculty the people on faculty and staff here who are Phi Beta Kappa members? Well, yeah, this is what Charles assembled. This is not easy to find, because you could just ask, but there's no wonderful. You'd think that you could go to Phi Beta Kappa and say, could you please give us the people who live in Oklahoma, for example? But no, it's not so simple.
And most were very surprised that we never had a chapter. Because I think everyone in that committee was very, how can we not have a chapter here? This is a great university.
And Tulsa had one one before.
Yeah, way
Before
before.
OSU.
Oh yeah,
Yeah, way before.
and OU was the first, and we're the third, I guess.
Save the best to last.
Well, I won't go there particularly. OU is a fine university.
Yes, it is.
And the University of Tulsa
It
has,
is too.
I mean, it's very different because it's a private university. But I think it's top 100 research universities, which is, at least that's what they said at the Tulsa airport when I was there. I assume it's so. Yeah, this was something I was very proud to be part of. In the middle of it, I was not always pleased that I had agreed to do these, because it was just, how do I get this information? Because it would be something, it would be just not exactly what we normally produce, and so something special had to be done to figure it out. But, or then, you know, and then there was the getting everything formatted the same way so it looked nice. And I think, I think that was, because I do work with books and I do editing, and it's an unfortunate aspect of my personality that I actually enjoy things like that. It's so yeah, that font's not matching that font. We've got to fix that. So
Attention to detail.
well, there's attention to detail, and there's also just you know, there are certain DSM conditions that are actually considered academic virtues, and obsessive compulsive would certainly be one of them, as well as the ability to hyperfocus.
So looking forward to the next 10 years, what's your next challenge?
Oh, I have no
You
idea. I
don't do
take
that?
things just doing what I do, but much better than I'm doing it now.
Well, where do you consider home?
Well, this is here.
Stillwater?
Yeah, very much so, yeah.
Okay. Not Pennsylvania or Ohio?
No, I was in Philadelphia this past weekend, but that's a place to visit. So.
We've asked this, I believe, almost every person we've interviewed. Were you ever given the secret Phi Beta Kappa handshake?
It was.
Do you remember what? I guess you can't say it because.
I was going to say, the nature of secret is that.
Is it different for everyone, or is it just the
Don't know,
same
because
for
it's
the
so
handshake?
secret that
Oh,
they-
you
it's
don't
so,
need
we
to know?
can't even talk about it.
Right.
Yeah, the alleged secret handshake.
So you were given it once you were an honorary member?
I can't even tell you that.
Well, that's no fun.
For you, but for me it is.
Where's your Phi Beta Kappa key?
Key. I have not gotten a key yet. I never got. There was a long gap between when I was officially a member and when Phi Beta Kappa realized I was a member. So,
Would you like a key?
a key, yeah, I can buy a key. I mean,
I don't mind, I'm sure we have the money for it.
I think I do too, so, but, yeah, you know, I have my plaque. That's awesome. And, so, yeah, it's all,
It's all good.
it's all good.
All good.
That's exactly correct. That's exactly correct. It's good. I'm proud of that as that opportunity, and you know, there are great faculty members here, some of whom are members of it, some of whom are not. But it's something about what your disposition at a particular university at a particular time as an undergraduate. And of course, what you do in graduate school is what tends to make you a faculty member. But it has to do with a certain well-roundedness that we look for in the liberal arts.
It's a good foundation moving forward.
Yeah, and for those of us who think the liberal arts are the thing, this is very nice.
And in the end, the good guys won. Which is not always the case. The good guys won.
The good guys won.
It was
That's
a
funny.
30-year struggle.
It was about that.
About 30
yeah.
years, yeah.
It was about 30 years. Yeah, maybe more than that. I can't remember. Yeah, I mean, Perry really a lot of work, and for something that a committee found difficult to do. I mean, I think of how much more difficult it will be as an individual, and particularly since, I mean, for the longest time there he was a faculty member, professor of French, doing his research and so on. But to be able to have, I had much easier time having access to people who could generate data or to think about, or and frankly the staff support to put things together and to say, okay, we need this and such. And then when we were arranging visits for people, all the details of that requires more than just what one person does, but it requires the staff and the team and so on. And so he was trying quite valiantly for a long time. So greatly indebted to all the people who were part of that. Again, as you said, team. It's very much a team effort.
It reflects well on the university and those involved.
It worked out.
It worked out.
It worked out.
So I do remember that discussion, and if we didn't get it this last time, there were many people who were very depressed, and there was a real issue whether we would continue. I think in the end
Yes.
we would have, but there was...
In fact, I think the time before the one where we got it, we put that one together, and then when we didn't get it, I remember people said, well, we're going to do it. I think it was maybe Bob Grolman who said, well, we're going to, it's time to go again. And you go, oh no. So it took a little time to get geared up. And then as we got going, we just said, we're going to put the best effort we can into this. Because, and there was a real sense of, by gum, this shouldn't be a long shot. This should be, that really it was high time. And so once we got that sense of indignation, that was helpful.
Well, over those years, too, the university itself, it did improve in all sorts of areas.
Yes, very much so. Very much so. So
Maybe this encouraged that, or, I mean, you don't know which came first. You know?
So arguably, Phi Beta Kappa was right all those years in rejecting us, but I can't really go there.
So having our first Rhodes Scholar made a big difference, you know, the honors
Yes.
program and all that. I mean, it was just at the right time, everything was in our favor.
That's right.
Everything just clicked finally.
Everything just clicked.
We became a Truman institution. We just had a lot of things that indicated, see, these are the types of students that you are not allowing to be in Phi Beta Kappa, which was really part of what, because Phi Beta Kappa really isn't about the Phi Beta Kappa faculty. That's a nice part because it says you're the type of institution that attracts these sort of people, but it's really about the students and what we provide to the students. In other words, are we capable of sustaining a Phi Beta Kappa chapter year after year? And the answer is yes.
Yes.
Yes. Anything else?
I think that's it. Again, thank you for your time. It was a privilege.
Thank you, this was fun.
Thank you very much.